Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. Today, we continue the topic of growing in our recovery. Recovery can be messy, and even though we may not see the immediate result, sometimes, having those goals, those milestones, and kind of setting goals in our lives can be kind of be encouraging during those times when it doesn't seem like we're moving anywhere. Today, we have a new guest. Her name is Mary. Thank you so much for joining us, Mary. To share your insight. I like the fact that I have guests that return. So I hope you do return, Mary, later on. But thank you for coming and sharing your insight with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
I want to share with those who are listening. It's a disclaimer. If you're in crisis, please seek appropriate professional help immediately. The crisis hotline in the United States, 1-800-273-8255. I do believe they're going to change that to a more shorter number in this summer, but for now, that is the number. I have a quote, because I always say people say it better than me, Mary. So always someone has said it better than me. Helen Keller says it this way: although the world is full of suffering, it also full of overcoming of it. What comes to mind when you hear this quote? We're trying to. A lot of times people come from all walks in life when it comes to recovery. When you hear this quote, what comes to mind?
What comes to my mind is hope. It's real easy to know that the world is full of suffering. You just look around in your own life and other people's lives, and if that's as far as you get, that's as far as you're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
But you also need to notice that alongside of that suffering are people who are overcoming it, are people who are helping, are movements away from that. So that regardless of what you're going through, there is hope. There is hope because other people are overcoming it. There's hope that you can overcome it as well.
I really appreciate that. There's this one book my wife has, untranslatable words from other countries. I thought it's Harath. It's Welsh. It says, a homesickness for somewhere you cannot return to, the nostalgia and the grief of a lost place of your past, places that never were. Sometimes we look back at our lives, back in the past, and it's not really what it is. Sometimes in recovery, we may have a skewed view of what happened, or we may have experienced something that, we have to work through. Uncertainty, a lot of times. Sometimes when we do this and we don't give us time to heal, we put the bar so low when it comes to recovery and healing. I'm just going to ask you a simple couple questions real quick, Mary. Before we learn a little bit about your story, what have you seen that worked for you and what has not worked in your own recovery? And, I know we're going to go into it more, but what would you say? What has worked and what has not?
What has worked is working with other people. Is finding another person, or is finding, for some of it, us, and for me, it was finding a higher power, something that can help us. Because what doesn't work is me trying to fix myself with myself. Because I get, it just gets worse. When I'm in that place of darkness, and I look around, all I see is darkness, and I convince myself that it's always going to be dark. And so there has to be some light from somewhere. And to reach for that light, and to hold on to it.
I love what you said. Even though Revive Ministry does not proselytize, it's mostly outreach, but I do encourage people sharing whatever is helpful for them, because in the faith-based side of it, even those who are not listening or not, one thing that's nice is so much changing around us, at least whether you believe in it stays the same. That's encouraging at the very most basic level. But at the same time, hope. You said that in the very beginning. I feel working with people, we sometimes are too close to our problems for us to see them clearly. And like I said in the beginning, sometimes we don't see any improvement. We get discouraged very, very quickly. And having people around, especially even helping other people, sometimes can be helpful. Getting a little less of ourselves and more of others in our lives, because it gives more perspective. You wrote a book. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It's easier to see growth in other people than it is in ourselves a lot of times.
We are very hard critics to ourselves a lot of times. One of the biggest things, I work in the mental health field, is I ask clients, I'm like, well, do you have a hobby? They're like, I'm allowed to have a hobby? Yes, you are. Everything can't be a crisis situation. So I want to ask you wrote a book. It's called Unfreezing Trauma. What prompted you to write it? If you'd like to share that.
Well, I went through a therapy called EMDR. And as I was going through the therapy, my therapist had me write what happened at the session, what happened in between the sessions. And after I finished, I had this wonderful story that showed exactly how this works. And I ran into people online who had questions about it and wanted to know, how does this work? And I thought, well, this is a good thing. I have this book. I have this journal. So it went through several edits, and this therapist came in and put her notes in it, and, we whipped it into shape and got it out there, because it can be so helpful to people to know just what happens.
It's always, I feel like whenever I talk about, with my clients or even with people I know about coping skills, journaling a lot of times is in the forefront. Writing things down, because it's really easy to forget. We're a very forgetful people. You look at the calendar, there's a lot of things reminding us of things that we should remember. But I do like, I want to talk a little bit about EMDR, because I'm a little familiar with it, and your experience. Well, those listening, I'm not going to assume. How would you explain it? Can you explain a little bit, not all the little parts to it, in your own words? What is EMDR therapy, and how has it impacted your life? In your own words.
Okay, EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing, and it's you go through traumas that you've experienced in your life while both sides of your brain are getting stimulated. I watch my therapist's fingers go back and forth in front of my face. You just keep your eyes on them, you don't move your head. And there's something about that bilateral stimulation, that getting the left side and the right side both working, that kind of unfreezes that trauma. Because traumas replay exactly the same way. It's not like you got a different trauma. It's not like you got a different view. You have the same view of this trauma that goes and goes and goes. And it feels like it's happening right now. Or it feels like it can happen at any second. Yeah.
And, as I would say, as simple as a concept is, it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. Like, the idea of I'm unfreezing trauma. These ideas, I feel, at least for myself, and being exposed to it, I understand it, but is it easy? No. That's why this part of your therapist had you journal it. It's a process. It's like if I told someone who just lost a loved one, here's a quick grief solution. It doesn't work that way. It takes time. So and a lot of times people don't even think about EMDR or these other ways to kind of address trauma. And I feel when I was looking through your profile and seeing that the book and that you wrote in your, I was just like, well, I would love to like highlight that. This month is growing in recovery. Sometimes we think growing is adding on. Sometimes it's just reflecting and kind of unfreezing some things that's been stuck in our lives for so long. So,
yeah. We get to let them go. They go back in the past where they belong, and they don't haunt your everyday anymore.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
And and I feel like some people who've mentioned who were successful in either EMDR or other therapies, they would say, when it comes to trauma or PTSD or anything like that, it's a response you would have if you're in danger. Your life is in danger. So they're like one illustration person said, like, it's if I'm in the forest and I see a bear and I react to it, that's one thing. But what if that bear is right everywhere I go, when I'm walking down the street with my family, when I'm at anything? And that is kind of one. And I liked how he went through that process. So I know it's different for everyone, but that's why it's not conclusive. That's why people address it. And I'm really happy to hear that it has been effective for you, the EMDR. What would you mind just sharing a little, obviously, whatever you're comfortable with, what brought you to get EMDR and how are you doing today? Basically, what?
Well, I had traumas and I hadn't dealt with them, and it seemed to be doing okay. And then it's like 20 years afterwards, and all of a sudden, my body starts just going like this, right? All of a sudden, I start having these seizures. Okay. And I didn't know what they were from. And they went on for 11 years. And we went through lots of different diagnoses. And nobody thought PTSD. Nobody thought that at all. Until I ran into a man who had done EMDR on trauma. And he said, I bet you EMDR will work for you. And I still had enough hope left. After 11 years of it, it was a long time. Enough hope that I tried another thing and it worked.
Oh, that's wonderful. Would you mind sharing some of this with those listening, some signs to pay attention? If you feel like to keep yourself balanced, but this is what I'm trying to say is, what would you, if you saw yourself notice, because 11 years, you, like a lot of us, we may have something that happened in our past. What do you think, looking back, you journaled a bit and you did the EMDR, what do you think were the signs that you were not seeing that was happening to you?
Oh, well, I had the whole right side of my brain involved in holding trauma.
I see, yeah.
It was like all locked up in there. And when things would happen, I would throw things back in there. And I'm a recovering alcoholic too. If you're an alcoholic woman out in the world, horrible things can happen to you, and they happened to me. And I just threw them back in there. I didn't notice while that was happening. Now, I notice I don't wait for myself to feel uncomfortable very often. I wait till I see that I'm not doing. I do meditation in the morning. If I skip meditation, I have a meditation group I do once a week. If I'm skipping that, if I'm not talking to people, if I'm doing those kinds of things, then to me, by definition, I'm getting myself out of balance.
Yeah, and I feel that's those subtle things that people overlook. Well, yeah, you worked hard, but you should take a break. But this is different. Like if getting up and doing meditation, well, for me, a lot of times it's simply when I make my coffee or my tea, or now it's tea. Whenever I make tea, I go through the whole process. Like a lot of times, my thoughts go so fast with me. Everything that so a lot of times I try to slow things down. A lot of times just going the car ride to work, or just certain things are kind of everyday thing that I like to do. Or I'm in church. I do a lot of church things. I'm a leader in a church, so a lot of times it's just, if I say I don't want to go to church, and some people outside will be like, yeah, you're working too hard. But that's not the point. You get what I'm saying? Part of that part of that work and having that balance and whatever that looks to you, like I said, every day can't be a crisis, but there's a difference between a passion and a hobby. There's a difference between taking rest and avoidance. It's these kind of things you have to kind of divide. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's this word. I use words because I can't really say them well. My wife has this untranslatable. It's from Hindi. People can read it. I'm not going to mess this up. But it says ensuring that things happen even with minimal resources. That's the story of the game with the mental health community. A lot of communities in regard. So recovery can be messy, whether it's family or personal or whatever your situation is. What have you seen work in your experience when resources are limited in your journey? Some people and maybe not with you, maybe with others. Journaling's one thing. Some people go for walks. What has been helpful for you when you can't go see the therapist every time you want, or when you can't go get the care that you would think you would need?
Not to get religious, but to have some kind of connection with a higher power.
I think that for me, I encourage people to share this kind of thing. Not, but at the same time, I feel if it's a positive thing in someone's life, when the faith is positive, it's not. Then I'm just like, oh yeah, use it for your recovery, because that is a good anchor for you to kind of stay. Continue. I'm sorry, apologies.
Yeah, I like your idea of anchors. I mean, it's important to have them, and they're not based on money or who has what, or if you got enough food, or if your living situation is ideal or anything like that. You have some anchors outside of you that you can count on. Sometimes those are people, they're friends. Your therapist does go up and down whether you can see him or not. But you can find a friend, someone else who is in recovery, someone that you can trust, and use them as an anchor.
Yeah, I think community is a huge thing. Why is there support groups? There's support groups, and the funny thing, I remember talking with, and also reading, and also noticing myself, you get 4 people hurt in a certain way. There's like maybe domestic violence, for example, but there's a safe place, and they're able to share. Nothing changes on their people look on paper of their lives, but they feel better and they do better. Why is that? Whether you're faith-based or not, there's something about sharing that's healing. Being with people in the community is healing. For me, that's tremendously inspiring. So that's why, at least when I started the podcast, before this, I was just doing events in where I live in Florida, and then when I started, I was nervous. I'm like, I never done a podcast, but one thing I liked about it was I could continue to meet people and talk to people in the safe space about their story of recovery or whatever the theme is, because I think the conversation needs to continue. That's the whole thing. So I really am encouraged that you are here. It was really wonderful. But any final thoughts you'd like to share? We're going to share where people can find your book if they're interested in obtaining it. But any final thoughts you'd like to share when you think about growing in our recovery? What stands out, or what would you share with those listening saying, I'm okay, this stuff, like, what would you share about, I don't know, taking initiative to your wellness? You take an initiative, like, I want to be better because I deserve to be better. I can't have a hobby, that kind of thing. What would you like to share?
That it's hard. That if you're going along and things are kind of on an even keel. I went 6 years working 9 hours a week, and I was okay with that. That was the max I could do. And when that started to crumble just a little bit, that signaled to my whole psyche that this is trouble. Yeah. This is really trouble. And that's when I heard about EMDR and was able to go for it. Even if you're in this horrendous situation, you have to grab at whatever looks there. And even if you think, I'm holding it together, reach for things that look better. Reach for the light.
Yeah.
You know.
I remember, you know, just, you know, when I think of accountability, you know, they have accountability. It sounds like a bad word, but it's only a bad word when it's not a safe place. You know, when you have that place where you're like, I want to be better today. Sometimes I just tell my clients or people I care about, it seems overwhelming what they're going through. I'm like, you know what? Don't worry about that. Just be better today. And I just really thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for joining us and discussing. I always have a goal in mind whenever I have a new guest. I want them to come back, so I will probably reach out to you later this year, and we'll try to figure something out. It was wonderful to have you. All information about Mary's book and everything and notes will be in the notes of this episode. And thank you, Mary. I just want to share those who are listening that you can stay updated with all things Revive Ministries through the various platforms. But ReviveMinistriesFL.com is our website. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries Podcast, leaving you with the last quote. It's from Jennifer Brown. It says, just like there's always time for pain, there's always time for healing.